Hello, everyone. I am Tara All here in an EA Zoom group meeting. And the topic that I chose to talk about today is something that has been on my mind for a while now, but I haven't fully figured out how to synthesize it. So this exploration of confidence is something that I want to kind of go through some different pieces today and really just see where it goes. And I want to share from a more, I guess, organic place than, my style oftentimes is to have very detailed slides and not miss any certain points, but I'm just not at this place with this topic. So I'm going to share what comes up for me and then hopefully leave some time at the end for anyone that's live to jump in, because that is usually my favorite part of these meetings. All right, so let's get into this. So when we are thinking about confidence, I spent some time thinking about, well, what defines confidence? What is it? I think it can come in lots of different flavors and costumes. Google definition says the feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something, affirm trust. To me, it really is a belief in oneself and our own powers or abilities. So self-trust is a big part of it. And confidence also many times comes down to courage. And so then I spent a little time, well, all right, what do we in our society say courage is? Well, someone with courage is bold and brave, unafraid to face tough challenges. So all of these things are coming back to the same building blocks. Fortitude is another good word here. Mental and emotional strength in facing difficulty. So I throw this out there just to think about confidence and then to inspire you to really broaden the idea of what confidence is, and especially what confidence might look like. When we get into this a little bit more, you'll see what's kind of happened in my preparation. But I literally started with the planets that made the most affiliation with confidence, and then I started going everywhere with it, because I don't think confidence is a signature that comes from 1 or 2 or even 10 places. So when we're looking in the chart for confidence, thinking about it this way, let's say a client or a friend comes to you, or you're struggling with confidence in certain areas of your life. We can definitely look in the chart to see kind of what's going on with that. But that could be all over the place. And we also can see overinflated confidence in the chart, which sometimes comes across as, hubris or dramaticized ego, all these types of things. But generally, even when we see something in the overcompensating phase, it's because there's some deep sense of lack or issue around the piece of confidence itself. So when I say confidence, it can present as under or over or all over the place. But ultimately, for any of us to really, I think, have a sense of well-being, this idea of self-trust and self-belief in our capabilities is important. And not that we have the answers to things necessarily, it's not like pulling out the formula for how to do something, but that we can trust that in any given moment that we have the capacity to be present and to respond to whatever is happening, even if that response is a big, I don't know, or I need some time to think about it. But it is that confidence that we will be okay from moment to moment. So I start with Jupiter, of course, because to me and in my training, Jupiter is directly correspondent with confidence, and among many other things, but to try to limit the scope a little bit here, Jupiter, when it comes to confidence, it is, in my mind, confidence in our personal truth and in what we believe, in our life philosophy, in who we know ourselves to be. And so from that place is really how we go about with courage and strength day to day to go through all the operations of life. When Jupiter is afflicted or challenged in a birth chart, oftentimes wherever it is contacting in a difficult aspect or a difficult placement, it speaks directly to issues around confidence. Confidence just in what we know, in our inherent nature, in our intuition, in the things that we can't just look up in a book. So Jupiter, when we're looking at a chart, if issues of confidence are coming up, or I'm just exploring confidence or the confident nature of someone, I would look at Jupiter by sign and by house to begin. Where is it sitting? Because where Jupiter is, oftentimes in things it's touching, there is a great sense of confidence, unless it's something in a difficult aspect. Now, thinking about aspects, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, the angles, but one thing that comes to my mind right away is, let's say you have the rising sign is Taurus, for example, which we might not think of as being a very outwardly demonstrative, courageous type of sign, right? But if the ruler of Taurus, Venus, for example, is conjunct Jupiter, that would paint a whole different picture. And so these are the kinds of things that Jupiter can really bring into a chart, as far as our understanding of someone's self-confidence and where they're at in that process. Because I think self-confidence is a process. We are, by living and having experiences, and experiences belong to the realm of Jupiter. The learning and the facts and the material and the relations of things to each other, that is the mercurial side, the Gemini side. But the Jupiter side is this more inherent knowing. So let's think about Jupiter in retrograde. So automatically we can know when Jupiter is in retrograde that there are probably some issues. A person probably in some areas of their life is reclaiming confidence, their own self-trust, the trust in what they believe, and their intuition on some level. So retrograde Jupiter is a surefire sign that that's up for someone in their life. Now, where they're at in that process is, up to your conversation and actually knowing where the patient or the client is in their own evolution. Jupiter square the moon's nodes as well. That would be another example of confidence, issues. And square the nodes sometimes can be, going back and forth between maybe feeling confident, maybe trusting oneself, thinking like we've really come into the truth of who we are and our life philosophy and what we really believe in, to then all of a sudden get pushed back and something happens and all of a sudden we're back to the place of scrambling for, trying to figure out what that might be at a deep level. So Jupiter certainly on the angles has a big impact. You can imagine if Jupiter sits right on the ascendant, for example, that gives a big boost of confidence most of the time. Jupiter wants to make something bigger, right? So whatever it's touching, it's expanding, making bigger. I always think about Sagittarius and Jupiter as, wanting to one-up things, always wanting to go above and beyond. And any other prominent signatures you can think about with Jupiter as well. Just as you're playing around with it, think about, where does confidence come into play? And then I moved to Mars, because Mars, to me, also has a huge impact on our confidence, and certainly on the confidence that we project outward into the world. Because Mars is the part of us that initiates action on our own behalf. It's our get up and go to get, it's how we go about getting what we want, how we go after our authentic desire. So Mars has a lot to do with our courage, our boldness, our energy in general. It's also our sexual energy and our willpower. So thinking about where Mars is and what's happening with Mars in a chart, again, gives you an idea of that, like let's say if someone comes to you and says, I'm really struggling with asserting myself in life. I know things I want, or I know things that I know there are things I want to share. I feel like I have this sense of purpose, but I just feel crippled when it comes to moving forward and taking them out into the world. I think that Mars is a really good place to look, because on a personal level, Mars is like, the legs that moves us forward. and the part of us that is willing to kind of, you know, take the challenge and go for it. So a Mars, for example, with a difficult aspect to Saturn, you know, slows it down. You know, lots of teachers speak about that particular aspect being the driving with the brakes on. You know, it's like I try to go forward, but there's this part of me that holds me back. So especially from an outside perspective, someone with an inhibited Mars oftentimes might not look very confident. That may not be the case. It just may be the way they express their confidence isn't as open and out and masculine in nature. But in our world today, we look to that, right? Like if someone were to ask you, what is the epitome of confidence? What does it look like? I think the average person's response would have some correlation to how that person boldly steps out into life, boldly presents themselves, boldly shares, you know, what they believe, has the courage, you know, to be who they are. And you know, frankly, they don't, you know, Mars is a big part of that in action. And then we come to Chiron, which for me is one, and we'll look at my chart just briefly in here because, you know, I am my example really that I'm working off of this with. And Chiron, I believe, ultimately is where we can develop medicine and where we truly can be of service and healing to ourselves and in the world. But initially, because Chiron represents the wound of separation, where we feel like we're so broken that a fix is impossible, that we build up things around that wound to protect it because we really don't believe that the healing is possible. On some unconscious level, we have that belief. So when we look at a chart and we look to see what's happening with Chiron, by all its placements, for me, it's an immediate trigger of, wait a second, this person might really question their own confidence in that particular area. So mine's in the first house. So it's interesting because I have Mars rules my chart and I can be very assertive and very dominant, but that Chiron in the first house, it's interesting. I have deep, deep issues of being very afraid and uncomfortable initiating action on my own behalf, and especially based on what I want. But what's interesting with me, probably not unlike many other people with a similar signature, that Mars ruled chart still wants to charge ahead. So early on in my life, I built up a lot of areas where I developed overconfidence in some ways. So what I would show to the world was, look how strong I am, look how direct I am, look how I can focus and go for this thing while being able to hide some of the other pieces in there. And I'll piece some of that together in a little bit. So Chiron is a really, really, really good place to look when people are having issues and questions around their confidence. And remember, people might not always come to you and use the word confidence. So, you know, listen above and beyond and around the words they use. It may be just that, you know, I don't feel like I'm getting what I want. And that can be an indicator. Not everyone, especially people with wounded confidence signatures, may not just charge right in and say, I need help with my confidence. You know, that's embarrassing, especially to those of us who feel like that's an important quality to have. And then when you add that feeling that something is lacking in that very thing that we feel is so important, it's a tough signature to touch. So being gentle, even with people who seem harsh themselves, oftentimes there's a real tender spot underneath. And Chiron can point to that. Saturn. So when I am thinking about self-belief, self-trust, confidence, Saturn is important here because Saturn is the part of us that is measuring within ourselves, even though we're using, oftentimes with Saturn, projected authorities that measure this. It's a reflection of the inner part of us that is measuring how competent we are, how responsible we are, how we're measuring up, what we're manifesting, what we're actually making happen, how respectable we are. So when there are Saturn issues, that is really a big poker into the potential strength around feeling like, hey, I get things done. I'm a contributing member to society. I'm my own authority, or I'm an authority figure in my family, in my job. So Saturn speaks to confidence around our stability and our strength, our wisdom and mastery, and our satisfaction. I talked on Saturn, I think it was last month, and Linda brought up satisfaction, that Saturn is satisfying when we do the work. And I totally agree with that. And in fact, I've sort of brought that forward in my day-to-day life, reminding myself that Saturn is satisfying. But Saturn is not satisfying when we do not feel like we're accomplishing things. And our confidence drops in those times. And so even if we put on a cloak of, I'm just doing my own thing, I want to be a free spirit, I don't care how the world measures my productivity, may be true, but it also might just be a way to hide from a lack of confidence in our ability to actually accomplish something worthwhile. And so in some ways, like, we just take satisfaction off the table. I can't satisfy myself this way, or I won't be satisfied this way. So confidence in contributing to the world, that's a big thing. I know for me that doesn't need to be in big ways, but in little ways every day, my confidence builds when I know that I've done something that's good, that's made things a little bit better. That's important to me. So when I've had periods in my life where I don't feel like I'm accomplishing something by my own definition, and again, this may be true or not, we may make up this entirely false idea of what our accomplishment is supposed to look like, but if we're holding ourselves to it, regardless of whether it's true or false, confidence will be an issue. Because in all of us, we have a Saturn function. It looks different ways and it comes in different flavors and shapes, but on some level, we're all programmed to want to do something that the world looks back at and says, wow, thank you, that was worthwhile. And we earn respect that way. So then to the sun. Confidence and the sun. Well, I think the sun for me represents different things, but a big part of it to me is the nature of our radiance. The authentic nature of our radiance, how we're meant to shine. And many times we have so many levels of expectations from ourselves, from our parents, from society, from, you name it, from past lives, unconscious memories, wherever these things come from, wherever the programming comes from, that sometimes we get separated from our sense of natural radiance. And the sun shows how we're meant to shine in the world. How we're meant to be bright, how we're meant to be seen. Dane Rudhyar also talks about the sun being the fuel that we run on. Talks about the rising sign being, the vehicle, but that the sun represents the actual fuel, like, if you will, like the life source that runs through us, that keeps us going. The sun to me also is our sense of purpose, and to me is our hero's journey. And you know, some people say that Mars is henchman for the sun. In other words, the sun has this hero's journey, and you know, Mars is the warrior that goes, you know, out, you know, to fight for that. But there's something about the sun, and I choose this image from the tarot because in many, many decks, the sun card has a child, divinity represented as a child, naked and open. You know, there really is this not just radiating out, but fully consumed in one's radiance. And I think about Leo, which is the sign that's ruled by the sun, when it is operating in its true strength and beauty, it is just a light that shines, and it shines on whoever is in its presence, and it makes that person feel like they're the most important thing. And if we don't have a sense of that within ourselves, of our own radiance and how we are meant to shine, then I think we come back to the confidence factor. If the sun is in a difficult position, showing that we're having a hard time authentically shining in the world, going on our own hero's journey is somehow impeded, then our confidence, again, is going to wane. At least the real kind of confidence, you know, that comes from, the real guts and blood and every substance, you know, that we're made of, and the spirit of who we are. So someone with a very prominent sun that's in harmonious aspects and in more comfortable placements oftentimes will be very comfortable shining in whatever way he or she naturally does. You know, and it's beautiful to see that. A lot of people oftentimes that struggle with, you know, I sometimes people ask oftentimes, you know, what's my path? And to me, that's a tricky question because you're always on your path. So I try to be very careful to, in some ways, reframe those questions. You know, we're not lost, and we're not trying to find a path. We're on a path. Once we have more awareness of what's going on with ourselves, we can start to make some different choices. We have new capacity. But to me, the sun is a big part of that whole process. You know, I let my light shine, which allows me to see how I'm visible, you know, to myself, to others. But if we're uncomfortable with that, for example, then we may prefer to stay in darkness. And in that darkness, sometimes it's hard to actually see or feel the radiance that's there. So then at this point in my preparation, I was like, okay, we're basically just going through all the planets, and definitely they all have a part of our overall confidence signature. We all have a confidence signature, right? The nature of our confidence, how our confidence manifests, how we stand outside of our confidence, how we stand into our confidence, what we're learning with the whole idea of confidence. But I think that we lose confidence, or we overinflate confidence when we break ourselves down. And many of you have probably already heard me say this, and I don't say this because there's a solution or a different way to do it. I say it to remind myself first, and then to share with everyone else that nothing operates alone. So when we're doing anything, like astrology, for example, and we're breaking things down, which is necessary because that's how our human mind can learn. But when we do that, we're actually breaking something down that doesn't exist in those pieces. And I think confidence is a really good example of this one. In other words, confidence isn't relegated to Jupiter. Confidence is everything working together. So nothing can be defined alone, even though we will and will continue to, and it will help us. It will give us pieces that hopefully will, place here and place there and sit on your heart or stimulate this part of your brain, and then we'll fall into a wholeness. But I'm always possessed to say that nothing is separate ever. So maybe confidence itself is simply trusting that we're put together perfectly. And that may be out of everything that I went through and thinking about how I could help people more around confidence with a chart, or how I could share with you more, or how I could explore with myself more. I thought, if confidence is simply trusting that I'm put together perfectly, then the chart can show me areas where I can open myself to accepting more things about me. But that was simple enough that it worked, at least for me, that definition of confidence. Not that I can do something perfectly, not that I have the answers to things, not that I can stand in front of a group of 10,000 people and, not toss my cookies in delivering a message, but just in trusting that I'm put together perfectly. And from that place, I can step into any situation and let it unfold. Or actually let the truth happen. It's interesting that Jupiter, we traditionally put with confidence, but it's also with truth. But the truth is a living thing. So how can we be in our truth? By being in our moment, having an experience. But we're not going to do that if we don't trust that, we're okay in that moment. So maybe it takes us breaking ourselves down to come back together, which I'm totally fine with, obviously, because I'm doing it now and I do it all the time. But one thing that has been changing for me is that when I'm doing it, I'm very aware that I'm doing it, and I don't hold on to the definition of that thing. I allow that thing to be information, not a full expression of something. So then I went down this road. I said, all right, so if confidence is trusting that we're put together perfectly, and we have to break ourselves down to come back together and recognize the perfection of what we inherently are and always were and always will be as we're self-revealing, then I said, okay, well then confidence would be faith in unity. Faith in the fact that we are one, that we are not missing something. And then that brings Neptune into the equation, because Neptune is our sense of unity, the sense of oneness, of there being no need to separate or even define something. In Neptune, there never is anything but the moment, and everything converges in that moment. So this confidence equating to faith in unity takes us back to being in our moment and letting our truth literally live through us and then show us what it is. Now it's almost like instead of looking, we then allow and it finds us. Or I think more accurately, we find us, which is really what we're doing anyway. So then I launch into this space of, all right, fine. So now we're way out there, right? We're letting go of separateness. We're letting go of, all these things that generally get us off of our kilter or make us worry. And I recognize that unless we feel safe, secure, and taken care of, we're never going to get there at all. And now we're in the moon's territory. And to me, the real gift of the moon is that we learn how to take care of ourselves. We learn how to give ourselves the basic comfort and emotional security, the nurturing, the feeding that we need, so that we are willing to take the bigger risks or the bigger steps. I was working on a different piece this week because our next new moon will be in Cancer. And so Cancer has really been on my mind, and the moon. And I recognize that in my life, sometimes the only impediment between me doing something pretty amazing is that I haven't created like one little safety structure that would give me enough security to then go jump off and do that thing. And, you know, an example from my life would be, I have a North Node in Sagittarius in the 9th house. So having new experiences, exploring new territories, long distance traveling, getting away from things that I know is part of my dharma, but sometimes that's terrifying for me. And so the more that I've been able to give myself an inner sense of home, because obviously I can't, you know, drag around like a physical home everywhere I'm going, but I've been finding new ways to create and to sustain a home in me, so that even when I'm going somewhere unknown and a part of me is, even while excited, also afraid to be out of my comfort zone, I'm always taking a little bit of my comfort zone with me. So there's a million versions of this. That's just one of mine. But confidence, I think, at least when we think about confidence on a big scale, right, oftentimes comes down to how well we take care of the seemingly smaller things so that we feel okay to step out there. You know, if confidence by our modern definition is partly stepping out onto the stage of life and being who we are and sharing who we are without holding back, then we all need some version of a security blanket that tells us we're okay and we're taken care of. And to me, that's the moon. Moon is our barometer for I'm okay. And I know for me, when I'm okay, I can do all kinds of things. But when my inner assessment is that I'm not okay, everything is thwarted. So what do we have left? We've now pretty much gone through the luminaries and most of the planets and how they fold into this idea of confidence. So I don't want us to forget Venus. Because what does Venus represent when it comes to confidence? And by the way, one way that you can break confidence down, because confidence, you know, the function of every planet is in every other planet. So if we say, well, what's the confidence of Mars, for example, you could just make a list of the things that, you know, Mars is associated with, and be it's confidence in my assertion, confidence in initiating, confidence in my energy, confidence in my ability to stand up and fight for what I believe in. So you can do that with every planet and bring it back to consciousness. And then it's like you have this whole new model for confidence that permeates everything. So Venus, just some examples would be confidence in receiving. Okay, well, that's a big deal, because if I've got Venus issues going on in my life, like real difficult aspects or placements of Venus, then my confidence in being able to receive from life may be shut down, may be very diminished. And if I'm not able to receive, I mean, we know that goes down a whole other list of issues. So they're all touching each other. But I think that you get the point here. It's also representative of confidence in partnership and relationship. You know, how confident am I really partnering with someone? How confident am I in forming an equal union with someone? You know, I'll bring it up again, but in case I forget, I'll bring it up now. You know, I mentioned that I had Chiron in the first house. So I have Aries rising and Libra on the descendant, and I have Pluto right on the descendant. Okay, so, and that Pluto is square Venus. In life in general, up until very recently, I have not had much confidence in forming a real union or a real equal partnership with someone. I've had lots of relationships, long-term ones, but that's very, very different than a true equal partnership. And that's a big issue in this lifetime for us, because we want real partnership and relationship. We as humans are you know, we're interrelated. We're meant to be together. So another piece around confidence with Venus would be confidence in embodying oneself. Well, sometimes this can even point to issues around being comfortable in the human body, with the human form, right? The earth goddess part of Venus certainly has a lot to do with grounding and being in our bodies. And our femininity. So that certainly is receiving, but it's our ability to flow, to mysteriously, change shape and, move. I mean, I think about it as we think about the analogy that is very common to all of us of, the pole representing masculine consciousness, right? It's a part that never changes, and the feminine flows around, dances around that pole. We've turned that into a very sexualized thing, but from a spiritual standpoint, I mean, it's very beautiful. So do we have confidence in our femininity? Can we flow and move, or are we grasping onto, the pole, unwilling to let life express through us, to be a channel for beauty? Self-love and self-worth here as well. You can see that Venus, even though we don't typically think of Venus as being the planet of confidence, man, this would be a big piece of confidence stumbling block if there were big issues here. And then we come to Mercury. So following that same process of sort of linking some of the pieces of Mercury with confidence, well, Mercury has a lot to do with confident thinking, confident self-talk. And we all know how much our self-talk impacts our day-to-day lives. And in fact, we know that our thought forms manifest and become real things in our lives, from thought, from our thinking, we birth things into the world. So how we talk to ourselves and to others and our confidence in that, makes a big impact. Also confidence in what we know and in our ability to share what we know. It's interesting, we talked about Jupiter before, which Jupiter being the more intuitive knowing. Jupiter is I know the truth. I can see the bigger picture conceptually. I can see how things synthesize together. It's really understanding the whole in a beautiful way, in an alchemical way too, But Mercury is the ability to translate that truth into language that people can understand. So if I have a lot of confidence in my intuition and what I know, but I have very little confidence in my ability to communicate and share that, the entire spectrum of that energy, because certainly the Gemini and Sag polarities are just one spectrum of energy, ruled by that Jupiter and Mercury, then there is an issue there. And we can look at that with any polarity, but this one in particular is important because a big way that we evolve is through our, it's like the emotional body is how we truly evolve, but our mind helps us get there. We're human. We have this human mind. So Mercury also represents, I always think of Mercury as our wiring and our connections. So that's even how our body is wired. It's how the different enzymes and chemicals and hormones talk with each other. It's also how we connect and communicate in the same way with our immediate environment. So haywire Mercury, which I'm very familiar with, oftentimes can translate into not having confidence in how, like in my case, how my own body talks with itself, or whether it does at all. And so we could extrapolate that to the outside and say, well, how do we move about in our environment and actually connect and share? Or do we feel disconnected? Being understood is important to many of us. And so Mercury speaks directly to that. And also Mercury has a lot to do with movement. Jason Hawley recently at NORWAC talked about where Mercury is in the chart. It wants to, to bring movement because it wants the story to keep going, which actually really helped me. That little bit of information really opened my heart and my mind around Mercury, that it wants movement. And it's not attached to which way the story is going. It just wants the story to play out. So part of our confidence through our mercurial function is confidence in our ability to be flexible and keep moving, regardless of which direction it goes, because we can change and go a different direction. And then we have the angles. So when we're looking at the AC, we're looking at just some examples here: our projected self-image, our physical self. I talked before about our life vehicle, but it can even just represent our physical body, and how we assert our physical body and how we assert ourselves into life. So that's a big deal when it comes to confidence. How do I assert myself into life? How do I move forward? How do I walk into a party, walk into a room? How do I show up? And looking at what's going on around the AC can tell us a lot about that. And you can weave all those planets and examples, depending on where they sit and what they do, into this. And then the IC, or the low heaven, speaks directly to confidence around our inner grounding or our rootedness, the deeper sense of who we are. So the self-identity that we form. Cancer and the IC are the formation of the self-identity. It's like we initiate the action deep inside our psyche to kind of dig around, okay, here's who I am, and then we form this identity which we're going to take out and to shine into life. It's almost like that moon function, right, of a fourth house happens before the fifth house function of the sun. We form that thing out of the dark that then comes out and becomes the light. But our confidence in the world of our imagery, of the less tangible aspects of ourselves, the full spectrum of our emotions and feelings sits in here. And also a confidence in, do we belong somewhere? And this belonging goes beyond and through, just our biological family or our upbringing. It's deep into something. And confidence in feeling cared for. The descendant, I spoke about this a little bit before, but this is really confidence in how we relate and in relationships and in equality, cooperation, union, and partnership. In other words, are we confident to not just go out into the world and do our thing, but to actually team up with somebody else? And oftentimes we have one side that we're much more comfortable than the other side, and we can see that by the different planets and the aspects they're making and the signs and all these kinds of things. And then the midheaven, the MC, would be our public self-image. And I always think about the midheaven as our impact and role in the world. It's not necessarily our career. So that certainly is part of that house, but to me it's more what we do and what we are no matter what role we're in. So an example of that would be if I or if you are a natural born diplomat or peacemaker, no matter what job you're in, whether you're working in a sweatshop in some third world company or country, or whether you're the top of a corporate company here in the United States, that role of peacemaker is just who you are and what you carry out there publicly. So confidence around this area would be confidence in our impact in the world in that public image of who we are. And that's important, again, because this comes back to the idea that most of us really want to be making a positive contribution to society. And especially if you're listening to this, you absolutely do, because we're of that mindset. But sometimes, we get comfortable with, maybe we get comfortable with the idea of our public image, but we feel something in our more private, deeper psyche that is part of our image, and we're not as confident in that. So these are all areas to play around with, like even maybe asking yourself a question, where am I most confident? Where am I least confident? And then looking to some of these places to say, okay, what's really going on with that piece? And what wants to come out? So very briefly, because then I want to just open it up for people to share. my own journey with confidence is actually a really good example, because my North Node is in Sag in the 9th house, ruled by a Jupiter retrograde that is square the nodes of the moon. So there's a huge part of me that is here to reclaim confidence in my ability to trust what I know, to follow my intuition, my own beliefs. And that's huge. I mean, much huger than we can have in a short discussion. But so for me, all these different pieces really make sense. And there's that Chiron in the 1st house that I told you about as well. So while I have this piece of, wanting to reclaim this confidence in what I know, I've come from this pattern of South Node in Gemini, ruled by Mercury conjunct Saturn, that has been, I'll just keep looking. I'll get more information. I'll figure it out. I'll be able to prove it to you. So for me, there's been a big learning curve in my life of being able to say, this is my truth, my philosophy, and I believe in it, without having to explain detail by detail to you why that makes sense. And frankly, it's actually embracing that it doesn't matter if it makes sense, that it's trusting the truth. So that's been a big part of the signature for me. And then the AC and the DC are interesting as well. I think that in some ways, I have all these willful signatures in my chart. Aries rising, the ruler of my chart is Mars. It's in Leo in the 5th house. But I feel like some of that is because I needed that. Like if I didn't have like that extra force to push through, I think I would give up. And I think, one thing I've learned recently, even after all my years of astrology, is, there was one particular signature that I never fully embraced. And there's probably still more to come, but I think at some point in time, in some lifetime, or in some realm, or some experience, I gave up. And that's not something that feels good to me. But I'm starting to understand why all kind of these supercharged, forceful, seemingly direct, fiery energies sit there, because that's what it takes to get me over the hump. So for me, that's been a big part of my confidence path. What do I need to give myself to reach those levels? And speaking of, the IC in the 4th house, and the idea of giving ourselves what we need to be comfortable and feel safe and to feel like we're cared for, so that we can go out and do the things that we're meant to do. There's been a lot of that work for me that has had to come first and continues to come before I can fully kind of spread my wings and feel okay to just go out there. So does anyone want to pipe in on confidence? I would just love to hear what you think, and maybe even like what you go to when someone comes with confidence issues, or even if they don't, when you feel that it's that it's up for someone. Supporting someone in feeling more confident makes a big difference. I mean, even in the little ways someone goes through their life, right? Feeling that we have confidence is big. Anybody?
I do. Oh, go.
Please. I'll stop the share. Okay. Unmute yourself if you're talking.
Okay, I'll
Stay
jump
down.
in. I started and somebody else started with me, so I'm back. Looking at, the idea of helping somebody build their confidence, it's something that I've done all my life because I have enough. So I like to share. I'm a big sharer. And so, but a lot of people don't know how to take it. They feel like, because I'm a very inclusive person, when I'm attempting to do, just share that some people, what do you want from me?
Mhm.
You know, now that's something that I don't know how to deal with, but in every other aspect, things like, you know, offering compliment and assistance and more beautification for a young woman, say, if I'm older and can help with things or offer that. That's been true since I was young and wasn't even older. It's just because I've got that Venus at the 10th house eye. So this will, you know, make that outfit zing and don't you look spectacular
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. It does tend to be around beautification because, you know, but also just I have a good eye for recognizing somebody's talent and pulling that out. And I think that is that Venus Leo 10th house right at the top there on the midheaven. I think that makes me want to do it too. I feel so good when I do that. Makes my heart huge.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the most, oftentimes when I'm with someone, it is in sharing my vulnerabilities that sometimes is more helpful than any of the signatures I can even pull out of the chart for them. You know, it's just that we're all in our process, right? And I like what you just shared, because for me, those moments when we like truly feel seen and beautiful, and I mean like authentically seen for our beauty, because that's different than just, oh, what a pretty face you have, you know, but really seen for it, that lets you step off into the next day and the next forever, right? With it, you truly take that with you.
Because everybody has a pretty face. I mean, everybody has a pretty face.
Yeah.
There's something beautiful about everybody physically somehow. How important is it? It's not.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's what's inside. It's what you have and you bring and you share.
Yeah, Dawn, I agree with that. It's Linda here.
Hi,
Yeah,
Linda.
I think I have a signature of hiding and shining at the same time. I do have Chiron in Aquarius in the 4th house, and that makes me want to hide. So I do all my astrology here behind a computer, and I'm not really connected to anybody, you know.
But you are.
Oh, well, yeah, kind of. And then there's Leo on the midheaven, the same as Dawn. And, I've made a few notes. Let me just look at my notes. Yes, I feel that, you know, creativity is happening in each moment, you know, because our soul is creating our each moment through the choices that we make. So making soul choices, Scorpio Pluto, which is square to the Leo, is finding new ways of shining. And the purpose doesn't stay stagnant. The purpose keeps on moving and changing, and so that Pluto Scorpio is very important in terms of confidence and trusting the soul and understanding that it's coming from the soul. Anyone else?
I knew you were going to share. I was just waiting.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
I love how Wanda always has something to say.
I struggle so much still with confidence. It's a daily thing. I have Venus square the nose. I also have the moon square the nose, and a 9th house north node with Jupiter in the 10th. So I struggle with my mind, I guess, struggle with sharing and being confident in what I know. But I also like to try to encourage and prop others up, I guess because I didn't really get that as a child. So I try to do that very much to others. And I recently got some news as far as is definitely a confidence builder, a blog that I haven't written in quite a while. I shared some information as far as how I got out of debt. And one of my readers just contacted me and told me that I inspired her on her own journey, and that she just recently completely got out of debt, paid off her house, paid off everything, and is set to retire at 53. So, you know, I say it's still a daily, you know, a daily thing there, because, you know, that makes me feel great, and at this, you know, sometimes I'm ready to just kind of go back out there and keep writing, and then I pull back, and it's like, you know, who am I to do that? So
maybe it's even like I have my own issues around that. Maybe those north nodes in the ninth house, I don't know, they're not they're not very easy, but also maybe just like for me, I confidence doesn't have to just to be in what I think I do well. Like sometimes it's being confident, and even when I'm stumbling and bumbling around, that's, you know, that's okay too, and that leads somewhere that I need to go. But I don't like to let myself off the hook with that. You know, my self-judgment is pretty harsh in those situations. But sometimes it's those moments. I mean, your example was beautiful, but there's other moments sometimes where we do things that aren't so beautiful, and they still become a support for someone. Who are we to say, you know, what is the last drop in somebody's bucket as far as having them have a shift in their consciousness or in what they do?
You know what I heard too when you said that, Wanda? I heard that you're confident in what you have. You know, you are confident in the information, and that it would do good, but it's the reception. That's the problem, is how it will be received. That's what I was hearing. What do you think?
And Venus square the nodes, again, is confidence in receiving. You're absolutely right, Dawn. That's tough.
I agree. It definitely is. Yeah, it definitely is.
But you have so much to offer, and you do it so well.
I don't feel that way. And it's, you know, you'd think that it's gotten better as I hit 40, and now that I'm, you know, I'm over 50, 51. But it's still, you know, it's still like, oh, you know.
But you're doing it.
You know, and I'm trying to just, like I said, just keep stepping forward. You know, every time I feel like maybe I shouldn't do this, and then it's like, you know, just say, forget it. I'm gonna go ahead and do it. You know. Yeah. Then of course, you know, once I put it out there, then it's like, yeah, I shouldn't have did that.
I think the solar eclipse at 28 degrees Leo coming up on 21st August is really going to help everyone. There's a huge shift from the universe to help us make adjustments in this area and to trust. So let's see what happens. Any other comments or questions?
Thank you guys for sharing.
Terry, you shared so much. It's incredible. I think I ticked all the boxes except for the moon. The moon is, like you said, feeling okay with oneself, and I think that's where I don't feel so great. But everything else, the feeling, you know, there's something about that feeling. Yeah. So thanks for sharing, you know, all that detail, the incredible detail. I love it. Absolutely love it. So anyone else? We have a few more minutes left.
It seems like we're probably done. It's great to be with you guys.
Okay, thank you so much, Tara. And would you all please thank Tara all?
Thank you, Tara. It was wonderful. It was beautiful.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. That was actually just absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to take it back all in and go through it little by little.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, bye now, everyone.
Bye, guys.